What's up guys, Jay Sway here, back in the dorm room. I wanted to talk a little bit about what I mentioned in the compression video about splitting bands in Logic. So I thought of a better way to do this. The more I got thinking about it, splitting audio should happen without any phase problems. So when we split audio and combine it back together, our problems are going to happen at the crossover points where we had the filters meeting. So I was looking up some third-party plugins, and they said that they claimed that they had no phase issues because they used inversion. And right when I read that, I was just like, oh, duh. Okay, now I know what I gotta do to make this work. And I'll show you how to make audio split and then come back together without any phase issues. So what I have pulled up here is just a vocal I had on the song that you just heard coming into the video, and it sounds like this.
Her hands walk where they please. Her words bring me to my knees.
Okay, so it sounds good. It's actually melodined because I don't sing that on pitch, and yeah, we wanna separate the bands and treat, let's say, 3 bands differently. So what we're going to do here, the idea is that we want to select our band and then basically subtract it from the original audio and then do it all over again. So how do we subtract something? Well, we flip the phase and then add it to it by basically adding the negative of it. This is basically what we're trying to do. So I'm going to duplicate this track right here. I'm going to zoom in so you guys can see what I'm doing here. So, but I'm just hit Command D. And that'll duplicate the track just as it was, so we have another mono track here. And now I'm going to go back up to this guy, and I'm going to insert a linear phase EQ. Why do I pick a linear phase EQ? Just because we're worried about these phase issues, I'm going to use a linear phase EQ. You probably could use a regular EQ. I'm just doing this because if that's what we're concerned about, you probably should use a linear phase EQ. And I'm gonna select our bass band here, just to let you know the low end of my voice come through. So let's check how that sounds.
Her hands walk where they please.
Sounds good. It's definitely the low end of my voice, so we'll keep that as it is. Now this track with the EQ on it, I'm going to duplicate it. So now I have the EQ on this track and nothing on this track. Now, since we're going to want to phase invert one of these and add it to the original to basically subtract that part from it, we're going to use a gain plugin on the track with the EQ on it. And you can find that in utility gain, right? And now there's a little button here that says phase invert. We're going to click that. Now any audio that we put on it is just going to flip it over, right? So I'm going to option drag these guys down to fill in these tracks. So remember what the part of my voice that we just heard, we're basically going to subtract what we just heard out of the original file when we add these 2 guys together. So what does that sound like?
Her hands walk where they please.
Right, it's the complement of the audio file that we just heard, the bass part. It's the not bass part, right? And that's exactly what we wanted. So if I listen to this middle one here, what do you guys think it would sound like? I have this low pass EQ, so it's probably bass. The phase is flipped. Does that make it sound weird? Not really. It's going to sound exactly the same.
Her hands walk.
Right, it's just the fact that we pair that with the original audio file, which sounds like the original audio file.
Her hands walk.
Where the phase is not flipped, and it subtracts that part out of it.
Her hands walk.
And that's perfect. So now we know that we can add this guy, our bass band, back in with anything we do after this point without any phase issues. So now I'm just going to select both these guys and bounce them in place so I can combine them into one audio file. And now these tracks can go away. I'll just delete them. And I'm also going to change the, anytime you bounce in place, it'll Logic will give you a stereo track, even if it was a mono track. So let's just switch it back to mono here. And now I'm going to call this guy my bass band, and I'm going to call this guy my mid band, because that's what he's going to be eventually. And like we did before, we just go through the same exact process. We duplicate first without any plugins, go back to this guy, and we insert an EQ linear phase plugin. And now we're going to want to do a little higher low pass filter, right? Because we only have stuff above 360 now, or whatever our cutoff was. So let's go listen for, well, I mean, I like to sit my vocals around, 3 kilohertz. So let's listen to about this.
Her hands walk where they please.
Right, so it's just high enough to get rid of those S sounds. So that's perfect. We don't want to compress those. So let's leave this as it is. And then what did we do after that? We duplicated the track and we inserted a gain plugin to invert the phase. So let's do that again. Invert the phase. And now we copied this guy over, right? So we're doing the same exact thing just to this upper band. So now this guy should sound even higher when I sum these two guys together. The original audio, well, I guess it's not the original audio file. This guy would be the not bass band, and this guy is going to be our mid flipped band, right? So these sum together will give us our treble band. Let's hear how that sounds. Perfect. So this is everything above 4800 hertz or whatever I set that cutoff to. So again, we're just going to bounce this to have our 3 bands, and there'll be separate audio files, which is awesome because now you can treat them separately. Like you can automate them. You could compress them separately. You could even use this as kind of a makeshift EQ by just adjusting the levels of the faders, it helps a ton. So I'm gonna go ahead and call this guy treble. And you can see why this is a little bit better way of doing things than just kind of hoping that there's no phase issues with Logic's EQ and summing them back together. Because now I know that when I play this, you should hear exactly the same audio file that we had before. And I'll let you be the judge of that.
Her hands walk where they please.
It sounds pretty much the same to me. So, what did we do? Let's recap. I made up this little flow sheet here that you guys can pause the screen on if you didn't follow what I was saying. This tries to organize what I was saying. You take your original audio, you copy it over, and you sum it with your low pass filtered but inverted. So all the pink things are phase inverted. The blue things are your bands that you actually ultimately want to get out. And these guys on the right are just kind of work that you got to do to get them out. You got to copy your original audio and sum it with the opposite of your low band to get the not low band, right? And then do it all over again. And you can do this and so on to get 2, 3, 4, 5 bajillion bands, as many as you want. So yeah, that's how this is gonna work. You can also set this up in buses. So say you didn't want to bounce in place like I did. Say you wanted to keep Melodyne open while you do all this other processing for dynamics across bands later, or you wanted to still work with a virtual instrument, like you wanted to work with MIDI and do this. You still probably can if you set up this same flow sheet in buses. So I haven't done this, but let's go ahead and try to do it with this MIDI file right here. So I'll let you hear how this guy sounds. I call it the Angry Robot. You guys can be the judge of if this sounds like a robot or not. but it's a synth. Right, I just needed to pick some synth sound that that was MIDI that we can work with. So let's go to this guy. I'm gonna call him Angry Robot. All right, so now that we have our Angry Robot, how we're gonna do this is by a lot of bussing, and it's not gonna be fun. It's not gonna be pretty, but you can still do it. I'm just showing you it doesn't have to be printed. It's just easier to do it the way that I showed you, the printing way, because then you actually have these separate files and you don't have a bunch of routing problems. So we're probably going to try to do the same thing with in the mixer for this sound. So let's go ahead and set our output to a bus so we can work with it in the bus system. So once we have the synth routed to bus 1, we can go ahead and low pass filter like we've been doing. So let's stick with around 400. Right, and then let's have all of our bands go to bus 10. Okay, so that's what that's why we have everything here, bus 1 going to bus 10. So now what do we need to do from there? Well, we need to send part of it out to another bus, right? So let's go bus 2, send it to Unity by option clicking, and then in the mixer, let's go to bus 2. It pops up here, and let's do the phase invert on it then. So now we have stereo files, so we got to invert both sides. Now that's inverted, and now we want to add this back in with our original audio file, right? So let's send all that to bus 4. We'll have the summing be happening in bus 4, or bus 3, sorry. So now we have the inverted bass going to 3. We also need the original audio file, this channel strip. So let's put a send in to bus 3 as well and set it to Unity. Now bus 3 will be our, I'll call it not bass. I'll call 1 our bass. 2 is our bass inversion. Yeah, so now 3 is our not bass. What are we going to want to do to this? Well, the same thing that we did to our first guy, right? That's what we did. That was the end of our chain here. So let's go ahead and set the output of this guy to bus 4. Right? And then we can add a linear phase EQ onto bus 4. Go higher with it. We'll stick by like 4K. Right? And these things aren't really rigid, right? Where you change them, you don't have to go ahead and open up another EQ and make sure you have the other one matching it, because this is just going to subtract what you have that filter to be from the audio. So it's actually like a one control type of thing. You can move your bands around pretty easily. So we have this will be our mids. I'll send this to bus 10 as well, as we did for our bass. I'll send bus 10 out to stereo output. Then we also need to get the treble band, so let's send from here out to bus 5. Set this to Unity. And on bus 5, what do we want to do? We want to invert it again. So I'm just going to copy this guy over by option command clicking. And let's just make sure that's inverted. Indeed it is. So now that that's inverted, we need to pair that with our not bass signal, just like we did for our Nexus, our original audio. So our not bass signal needs to be routed to, we'll say, bus 6. As well as with our inverted treble, right? So let's just set the output of that to bus 6. So what do we got going on here? Bus 10 is our overall kind of all the bands summed together. Bus 5 was our not bass inversion. Bus 6 was our treble, right? because it's the not bass plus the inverted mids, so it's just the treble. All right, hopefully you follow that. I'm going to send this to bus 10 as well. So now we have the treble, the mids, and the bass all going to the overall bus, which is what we want, right? And now we have the same sound, hopefully. Let's check. Yep, that's the same sound coming out, and now we even have, you know, the treble. There we go. We have the treble, the mids, and the bass. Well, I don't know why the bass is being funny. It's letting all of them through on the bass, but you get the idea. I wouldn't do this actually for MIDI files like this, but I'm just showing you that it can be done with buses. It's, like I said, it's ugly. There's a bunch of buses going on. You might be able to figure out a better way to wire this, quote unquote, but it's the basics of it. Usually I would just get the MIDI files how I want them, print them. That way you're saving on CPU. You don't have a bunch of, you know, instruments open. You don't have all these buses going. Buses actually aren't that CPU intensive, but virtual instruments are. So the more virtual instruments you have open, the harder your computer's got to work to play them. But yeah, going back to the vocal that we just had, now you really can do anything you want with this voice.
Her hands walk.
Let's just say we want to turn down the bass frequencies a little bit, turn up the treble. We want to compress the mids. We'll add a compressor.
Her hands walk where they please.
Right. And then from here, you can even sum these back up, send them to a bus, right? Bus 20, say, we'll call this Vox. And now we can even add compression from here, right? We could do pre-compression EQ. We could do, you know, a different compressor, maybe just to glue them together a little bit. We'll do soft, smooth vocals kind of thing. A little parallel compression. We'll let some of the dry through, and then we can do another EQ post compression after that. So compression in stages really sounds pretty good. So let's kind of listen to.
Her hands walk where they please. Her words bring me to my knees. Her hands walk where they please.
See, it already sounds really a lot better than how muddy it was before. I was using a Blueberry mic on this, and I love how it sounds. And with a little extra treatment like this, it sounds phenomenal, like, you know, $3,000 microphone. So I think that's all I got for you guys. Sorry that the busing wasn't that helpful, but hopefully you guys get the inversion thing. If you grasp that, I think you really got a lot out of this. So hopefully that helps, and I'll see you guys next time.
Sweet love, you're killing me.